Right. That's enough from me for a few minutes. I'd like to introduce David Taberner from Reckon, who is not only the lead architect at Reckon, he's the chief DevOps dude, as I call him, and he's also one part of our elite Cloud Warrior program as well. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome David.
Thank you, Ben. Good afternoon. Firstly, I would like to thank AWS for the opportunity to speak to you today. As it says there, my name's David Taberner, and I work for Reckon. Reckon builds accounting software for small to medium businesses and end-to-end software solutions for accountants. As Ben said, I work as one of the solution architects at Reckon. I head up our AWS platform architecture and DevOps team. I'm also heavily involved in various aspects of our product development and design. To me, AWS is a developer platform. As a developer, it gives me access to tools and capabilities that simply may have been outside of my reach. An example of that is network load balancing. Traditionally, in many environments, I would have had to log a ticket with my network team, wait for networks and IT to get my load balancer available to me, and that's if my organization even had access to the capability. I've worked in many that do not. With 2 API calls in AWS, I can get a bunch of servers sitting behind a load balancer. Finally, I can manage my infrastructure as code. As developers, this is something we're already comfortable with doing. I can use the same tools that I use my application code with my infrastructure code. I can put it in version control. I can put it in GitHub. I can even keep it with my application source code. Everything required to get that particular application out the door and in production in one place. And of course, all changes can be tracked. To steal a phrase that has been used quite a lot at this summit, the platform removes a lot of undifferentiated heavy lifting. But what do I actually mean by that? What is undifferentiated heavy lifting? Well, let's say I've been to a conference. I've read a few white papers and Docker is sounding like the thing to do. I retool my application and I get it all working on my local machine. Looks great. I'm ready to go to production. But then the pillars of well architected tell us, well, it needs to be reliable, it needs to be resilient, it needs to be scalable. And that's when I hit the wall. Now I have to look at building a Docker cluster. I have to work out how I'm going to manage releases. Well, AWS have a tool for that. It's called ECS, Elastic Container Services. ECS will take care of all the hard tasks of deploying out my cluster. They will even manage releases of my Docker images. I just tell them how many versions of this image do I want running, and ECS will take care of the rest. Then, when I come to releasing an update, ECS again will help me roll that out across my cluster in a seamless way. To me, that is undifferentiated heavy lifting. If there's one thing I would love people to go away from this presentation today and go home and learn, make it CloudFormation. CloudFormation, as Ben said before, is the orchestration language for AWS. And put simply, it is absolutely worth learning. It's written in JSON, a language that any developer who's worked in web recently should be quite familiar with. And it comes with great developer documentation. If you've ever coded against an API, you are absolutely going to be able to write CloudFormation. Maybe JSON isn't your thing. Personally, I'm a Ruby guy. There are a couple of great DSLs available that allow you to write CloudFormation templates in the language of your choice. One that comes to mind is one called CFN DSL, which is written in a Ruby-style syntax, and you run it through the interpreter, and it spits out JSON on the other side. CloudFormation has support and calls for almost the entire AWS platform. Every now and again, I run into a service or feature that doesn't have support for CloudFormation. And I invariably find that the CloudFormation team are working really hard with that particular product team to get the support built in. A little bit later, Ben is going to do a walkthrough of an Elastic Beanstalk deployment through the console. When you deploy Elastic Beanstalk, AWS use CloudFormation to deploy a stack under your account. AWS are heavily committed and consume CloudFormation heavily themselves as well. It's not going anywhere. For us at Reckon, it has become the absolute cornerstone of our environment. We have gained massive improvements to the way we do things, the way we are able to deploy, and the agility that we can move because of CloudFormation. Ben said before, it is absolutely his completely and totally and utterly favorite tool. And it is mine as well. It is absolutely wonderful. But I hear you. You might be sitting here today going, well, that's great, but I really don't have time to go and learn something new right now. I need to get some runs on the board. I need to do it quickly. Maybe code deploy is going to be for you. Put simply, it will push code to servers. One of my favorite features of code deploy is it has native integration with GitHub. So if I'm using a Git flow style model with my release and bug and feature branches, I can trigger a code deploy deployment simply by doing a merge to master. This is very powerful because now I can manage my deployments via a tool I use every single day to manage my application code. Now, maybe I have got my test and dev environment in AWS, but I'm just not ready to go all in yet. I may have substantial financial investments in my existing data center environment, and finance simply won't let me end of life that yet. Code deploy can help you here too. You can get the benefits of code deploy on your on-premise environment as well. I also believe code deploy can be a great migration tool. If you know you're going to move to AWS, you can retool your deployments to your production environment outside of AWS to use code deploy. And then, when you're ready, you can simply update the target in code deploy and punch it out to your servers in AWS. Of course, code deploy has support for CloudFormation as well. So when you do go down that path, you can still use code deploy. For us, we don't use code deploy for everything. It does have its place, but when we do use it, we found it to be wonderful. Put simply, it's simple and flexible, and it really allows you to get the job done. Some things we've learned along the way in our journey to AWS. This sounds like it's straight out of the marketing brochure, but it genuinely is faster to deploy services. There's no more waiting for IT. Now, I have a bit of an interesting background. I've spent some time as a developer, but I've also spent a lot of my career doing infrastructure myself. And it's not always IT's fault. They might have budgetary constraints, they might have process constraints, or they may just simply have too much coming in. Either way, using AWS frees up me from those individuals, and I can get working quicker and get my features out the door. Now, it's not a perfect world, and compromise can absolutely be key, but I'd like to think the best way to compromise is to make smart compromises. I stand before you here today with a legacy 2000 era Windows application that we run at mega scale. It scales up by hundreds of servers every single day. Now, we've had to make some compromises. We have to do scheduled scaling, which is not necessarily what we would always want to do. But I'd like to think where we have made compromises, we've made smart compromises. Rome wasn't built in a day, so don't be too hard on yourself. Be willing to make them. But try and make sure they don't lock you down for the future. Manage your cost as you go. This can be a big one. It starts out with a couple of instances, and then a few weeks later it's a couple more, and then before you know it, it's hundreds. Historically, if I was doing a proof of concept, it would almost be free. The hardware I'm putting the virtual machines on may have been purchased for another project, covered under that CapEx. I've worked in very few organizations that actually record well their power and cooling costs at a data center. So often you can go a very long way without anything costing you too much. In AWS, that cost does become aware. Every month you do get the bill. So track it early, and it's the best way to solve the problem. Having a tag policy can really help you with managing your costs. And it doesn't have to be complex. I've seen a lot of tagging policies, and a lot of cases people just overthink it. I'd like to give you an example of the tagging policy we use. So as you can see here, we very much use the keep it simple approach. We specify the environment that this instance belongs to. So here you can see this particular instance belongs to staging. What does it do? I may not be the owner of this environment, but maybe it's come up on a billing report, or maybe it's become an issue. What does it do? Is it a web service? Is it a database service? Is it a caching engine? What is it? The name, for us, as I said before, we're very heavy in CloudFormation. The name matches back to the CloudFormation stack. So I can now go and find which stack that came from. Owner is probably one of the most important fields in our tagging policy. It should be the email address of an individual or a team or squad who are responsible for that solution. And it means if something comes up and another team is looking at it, straight away they know who to contact, who to get in touch with, who is responsible for this particular environment. And the last tag is the service. What service or product does this instance or group of instances actually belong to? As you can see here, this actually comes from our Reckon 1 application product. Now, humans aren't perfect. The best way to get something done badly is to get a really smart person to do it a lot. And Lambda can help you with some of that tag management. Maybe I'll have a Lambda function that goes, well, if an instance appears and it doesn't have the right tagging, I'll use that owner tag and I'll send them an email saying, hey, I'm kind of a bit out of whack here. Maybe they didn't specify the owner tag. Well, maybe I'll just call a human, call the DevOps team and say, guys, there's a bit of an issue here. Maybe a week goes by, no one does anything about it. Or maybe the humans just don't care. So maybe what I'll do is I'll turn the instance off. Quite easy to do. Then maybe another week goes by and they still haven't done anything. Geez, they really don't care, do they? All right, well, maybe I'll just take a snapshot, store the snapshot in S3, and I'll terminate the instance. Now, we're all a bunch of engineers here, and I'm sure I speak for all of you saying none of us really like dealing with dollars and cents. I can hardly manage my own investments and my own finances, let alone anyone else's. However, if you've deployed a smart tagging policy, a couple of clicks into the Cost Explorer, and you can easily configure a report on tags. This particular report here, I'm using the service tag. So now I can present to a business owner exactly how much a particular product or service is costing them. I've worked in a lot of different IT companies and I've consulted for quite a few. I have rarely met a company that can actually report to their business owners on how much a particular product is costing. When you can do that and give that to a business owner, odd thing tends to happen. It actually gives them a lot of confidence to spend in the platform, which is good for us because that means we get more shiny toys to play with. And it also gives the business confidence to understand what's happening. Last but not least, if I'm building a new proof of concept and it's going really well, maybe it uses 50 instances, and then I realize, but there's only 50 people who are going to want it. Maybe it's not cost effective. And it can save me time putting a lot of energy and effort into developing something that's just never going to get off the ground. So I would strongly recommend having a look at tagging, having a look at Cost Explorer to help manage your costs. Well, that's all for me. I would now like to welcome the talented Ben Potter back on stage. If you would like to speak to me after this session, you'll be able to find me in the Voice of the Customer booth, or feel free to grab me if you just see me wandering around the floor. Thank you.